had gotten pitifully little money from her dad's insurance, and things had been tough for a long time. Johnny was the sweet spot in her life. Her hair was as fair as his was dark, her eyes as blue as the summer sky. She was a pretty girl, and she loved him. She worried a little about his going to college and meeting other girls, but she knew he loved her. Everyone in their class said they were the perfect couple. They were always together, always laughing, talking, joking, happy, and they never seemed to fight. As much as they were boyfriend and girlfriend, they were also best friends. And because of that, Becky had fewer friends than she might have otherwise. She and Johnny spent every minute together they could. They went to class together and saw each other at night, whenever possible, after sports, homework, and jobs. And they were both so conscientious, their parents no longer complained about how much they saw each other. They were rarely apart. And as they stood at the center of a cluster of high school seniors, everyone was talking about graduation and prom. They had kept it a secret between them, but Johnny had paid for her dress. Without his help, she couldn't have gone. And she smiled up at him now, 4 years of love and confidences and secrets between them, and her eyes seemed to light up like fireworks when she looked at him. "I've got to get going, you guys. I have to get to work," Johnny said, smiling at his friends. He worked at a nearby lumber company, taking inventory, sorting stock, and sawing wood. And he made good money for hard work. Becky was already working at the drugstore job that was about to become full-time for her, and had just given up her second job, waitressing in a coffee shop near school. It was going to be a lot easier for her now, working in just one place. Johnny worked for his father on weekends, and the lumber supply company after practice and games. He was going to work for them full-time all summer to make as much money as he could before school. "Come on, Becky," he tugged at her arm to pull her away from the girls who were still talking about what they were wearing to the prom that was 2 days away. For most of them, it was the end of an era, the culmination of a dream. And it was for Becky and Johnny, too. But they had had none of the stress and panic of some of the others, wondering who to take as their dates. Their relationship gave them both confidence and an unusual amount of emotional support. High school had been easier for them because of that. Becky finally managed to tear herself away from their friends and tossed her long blonde hair over her shoulder as she followed Johnny to his car. He was carrying both their backpacks and threw them easily into the back seat as he glanced at his watch. "Do you want to pick up the kids?" He tried to do that with her as often as he could. He was one of those people who enjoyed helping people out, and often did. "Do you have time?" she asked comfortably. In some ways, they already seemed married, and in their heart of hearts, they knew that they would be one day. It was another of the unspoken secrets they shared. They were so close, had grown up together, and sometimes it seemed like they didn't even need words. "Sure, I've got time," he smiled at her as she slid into her seat and turned on the radio. They liked the same music, the same people, the same food. She loved watching him play football. He loved dancing with her and talking to her for hours on the phone after work. Most nights, he dropped by her house on his way home, and then he'd call her when he finished his homework. His mother said they were like Siamese twins. The school where her younger siblings went was only 4 blocks away, and all 4 of them were hanging out in the schoolyard when they got there, and Becky waved. The 4 Adams kids came thundering toward them, and as Becky leaned forward to let them in, they piled unceremoniously into the back of the car. "Hi, Johnny," both boys said in unison, and Peter, the oldest one at 12, thanked him for the ride. They were nice, wholesome kids. Mark was 11, Rachel was 10, and Sandy was 7. Theirs was a noisy, loving, lively house, and 2 years after he had died, they all still missed their dad. All their mom had done in the past 2 years was chase after them and work too hard. She looked 10 years older than she had when Mike had died, and although her friends kept telling her she should start dating, she just looked at them as though they were crazy and told them she had no time. But it was more than that, and Becky knew it. Her mom had never loved anyone except her dad, and couldn't bear the thought of going out with another man. They had been high school sweethearts, too. Johnny dropped off Becky and the kids. She kissed him lightly before she got out, and he waved at all of them as he drove away. And as he disappeared down the street at full speed, she shepherded the others into the house and helped them to get snacks and drinks before leaving for work. She knew her mom would be home from her job in 2 hours. She ran the local beauty school. She was a pretty woman. Life just hadn't turned out the way she'd dreamed. She had never expected to wind up alone at 40 with 5 kids. Johnny was back at Becky's front door again 4 hours later, looking tired and happy. He stayed long enough to eat a sandwich with her at the kitchen table, chat with her mom, tease the kids, and head home by 9:30. His days were long and full. "I can't believe it's almost graduation. Seems like just last year you two were about 5 years old and going trick-or-treating together." Pam Adams shook her head and smiled as she watched Johnny unwind his long frame from the kitchen chair. He had played basketball in his freshman year and been good at it, but eventually football and track had taken up all his time. Pam looked at Johnny gratefully. He was such a nice kid. She hoped he and Becky would get married one day and that he would live a longer life than her husband had. But the years she'd shared with Mike had been so very good, she didn't regret an instant of them. Just the fact that he was gone. "Thank you for getting Becky's dress for her," she said softly. She was the only one who knew. He hadn't even told his mom and dad. "It looks great on her," Johnny said easily, slightly embarrassed by the look of gratitude in her mother's eyes. "We'll have a good time." He had ordered a corsage for her, too. "I hope so. Becky's dad and I got engaged at senior prom." She said it nostalgically, but it wasn't a hint to him. It was pretty obvious that they were heading that way, too, with or without a ring. "See you tomorrow," Johnny said as he left, and Becky followed him outside. They stood next to his car for a few minutes, chatting, and he took her in his arms, and they kissed. It was a kiss filled with passion, emotion, all the feelings they shared, and the energy of youth, and she was breathless when they stopped. "You'd better go before I drag you into the bushes, Johnny Peterson," she said with a giggle, and the smile that still tore his heart out after all these years. "That sounds pretty good. Your mom might get a little upset," he teased. None of their parents knew, or so they thought, how far things had gone, although unbeknownst to them, both their mothers were well aware of it. Pam had had a talk with Becky once and urged her to be careful, but they both were. They were both sensible kids, and so far, at least, had had no slip-ups and no scares. Becky had no intention of getting pregnant before they got married, and that was still years away. Johnny had to finish school, and so did she, and she wasn't even starting for another year. They were in no hurry. They had all the time in the world. "I'll call you later," he promised as he got into his car. He knew his mother would be waiting for him, most likely with something to eat, even though he'd eaten at Becky's house. And with no homework to do, he might spend some time with the kids and his dad, depending on how things were when he got home. He lived only 2 miles from Becky's house, and he was home 5 minutes later. He parked in the driveway behind his dad's car, and as he walked through the backyard, he saw his younger sister Charlotte shooting baskets by herself, the way he used to do. She looked just like their mother, and a little like Becky, with big blue eyes and long blonde hair. She was wearing shorts and a tank top, and her legs were nearly as long as his. She was tall for her age and beautiful, but she didn't really care. The only thing that interested Charlotte was sports. She ate, slept, dreamed, and talked about nothing but baseball in the summer, football and basketball in the winter, and she played on every team she could. She was the most perfect all-around athlete, male or female, Johnny had ever known. "Hi, Charlie, how's it going?" he said, as he caught the ball she tossed at him. It always made him smile because she threw like a guy. She had a remarkable talent for sports. Okay. She glanced over her shoulder at him after he threw the ball back to her, and she sank another basket. And he could see, when she looked at him, that her eyes were sad. "What's up?" He put an arm around her, and she stopped for a minute and leaned against him. He could feel the sadness emanating through her. In the last few years, she seemed older than she was, in part because she was tall, but she was also wise beyond her years. "Nothing." "Is Dad home?" But he knew he was by the car. Johnny knew what was bothering her. It wasn't new to either of them, but it still hurt after all these years. "Yeah." She nodded and then started to dribble the ball as Johnny watched her for a minute and then grabbed the ball from her. They played together for a few minutes, taking turns sinking baskets, and it struck him again how good she was. It was a shame in some ways that she wasn't a boy, and he knew she thought so too. She had gone to almost every game he'd played through all his high school years and rooted passionately for him. Johnny was exactly who she wished she could be. He was her hero, more than anyone on earth. It was a full 10 minutes later when he finally left her and went inside. His mother was standing in the kitchen drying dishes, while his little brother Bobby watched her from the kitchen table, and his father was in the living room watching TV. "Hi, Mom," he said, planting a kiss somewhere on the top of her head as she smiled. Alice Peterson was crazy about her kids, and always had been. The happiest day in her life was when Johnny was born, and she still felt that way when she looked at him now. "Hi, sweetheart, how was your day?" Her eyes lit up when she saw him, as they did every night. She had always had a special bond with him. "Pretty good. Graduation's on Monday, and the prom is in 2 days. She laughed at what he said as Bobby watched. "No kidding. Did you think I forgot? How's Becky?" Both kids had talked of nothing else for months. "Good." And then he turned his attention to Bobby, who smiled as his big brother approached. "Hi, kiddo. Good day?" Bobby said nothing, but the smile broadened as Johnny tousled his hair. Johnny had long-running conversations with him, told him everything he did every day, and inquired about his little brother's day. But Bobby never spoke, hadn't in 5 years, since he was 4. He had had an accident with his father when their father drove his car off a bridge into the river. They had both nearly drowned, and a passerby had saved Bobby's life. He had been on life support for 2 weeks, and he had survived it, but he never spoke again. No one had been able to figure out since then if it was brain damage from being submerged for too long or trauma. But no amount of specialists, therapy, or treatments had changed anything. Bobby was alert, aware, and carefully observed everything around him, but he did not speak. He was in a special school for the handicapped, and he participated in some things, but he lived in a world that was airtight now and completely sealed. He could write, but never communicated in writing either. He just copied the words and letters other people wrote. He did not answer questions, verbally or in writing. He did not volunteer anything. It was as though Bobby had nothing left to say. And ever since the accident, what had once been a tendency for their father to drink a little too much at parties had become a nightly anesthesia, so he wouldn't have to think. He never fell down, he never got sloppy, he wasn't aggressive or violent. He just sat down in front of the TV and got quietly drunk every night, and it was no mystery why. It was just the way things were, and had been for 5 years. None of them ever spoke about it. Alice had tried talking to him about it at first, and she had thought he'd get over it, just as Bobby would get over his silence. But neither of them had. And in their own way, they were both locked into their own worlds. Bobby into his silent bubble, and Jim into his beer. It was hard on all of them, but they all understood by now and accepted that it wasn't going to change.